You've read the story of Jesse James, of how he lived and died. If you're still in need of something to read, here's the story of Bonnie and Clyde. It was a 2-year crime spree between 1932 and 1934. America was in the middle of the Great Depression, and the United States had just begun its war on crime to bring down some of the large mob bosses of the era. Boredom, poverty, and a distrust of the government seemed to serve as the perfect breeding ground for the story of Bonnie and Clyde. Crime was already something the public found interesting, with names such as John Dillinger and Pretty Boy Floyd, but Bonnie and Clyde had something the others didn't have: romance. Bonnie and Clyde were a criminal couple, and the people loved every minute of it. Both of them grew up poor on the outskirts of Dallas. Bonnie Parker was a brilliant student who loved English, and Clyde Barrow was an excellent mechanic. Both of them desired the finer things in life, so what better way to achieve this than by robbing banks that are already so corrupt, even giving some of the funds back to their poor families. They never wanted to hurt anyone, but sometimes cops would show up at their hotels, guns blazing, and they'd have no choice but to defend themselves. In the end, the cops ambushed the poor couple who were just trying to help a friend who broke down on the side of the road, and they shot them for minutes straight without any warning. It's a classic American romantic tragedy. But how do we know these things about Bonnie and Clyde? Their case is somewhat unique, as both of them, especially Bonnie, played an active role in creating their narrative. The initial words of the video? It's the opening of a poem by Bonnie Parker herself called The Trail's End. Bonnie's love of literature caused her to constantly write about Clyde and herself, and Clyde would send the poems to national newspapers, who eagerly published them to help satiate the voracious appetite of a bored American audience. These, along with leaked romantic images of the fugitives, created the initial portraits of Bonnie and Clyde as Robin Hood-like figures who proved to the country that even the poorest in society can become legendary. This is the version of the story that's carried by the poems of Bonnie Parker, the newspapers across the country, and autobiographies by Blanche Barrow and W.D. Jones, fellow members of the Barrow Gang who spent significant time with Bonnie and Clyde. These stories led to the famous 1967 film Bonnie and Clyde, which was universally beloved and nominated for 10 Oscars. This is the primary text for most people, even those who've never seen the film directly, but know Bonnie and Clyde as an icon of thrilling and dangerous romance. This film is largely what romanticized the idea of mixing crime and romance, which is so deeply woven in our culture now that when Valentine's Day comes around, it's even considered a cute idea to call your significant other your partner in crime. But this isn't the whole story. FBI reports and reports by Texas law enforcement from the Dallas Municipal Archives tells another story about the couple. The truth is quite a bit less romantic. Let me tell you a different story. Clyde Barrow is raised in the slums of Dallas, learning from his older brother Buck how to steal cars at an early age. He's eventually arrested and escapes prison with the help of an impoverished waitress named Bonnie Parker, an intelligent girl but one who craves wealth and fame after a life of poverty. Clyde is caught a week later and sent to one of the most brutal prisons in the state, where he does gruesome manual labor and is constantly sexually abused by a fellow inmate who he later beat to death with a lead pipe. After being released on parole by purposefully cutting off his toes with an axe, Clyde has a legitimate hatred for the government. Maintaining his fast vehicle that can outrun law enforcement, he mainly steals from small mom-and-pop gas stations and grocery stores, shooting their owners at point-blank range if they don't comply. Clyde found joy in going out of his way to brutally kill cops. Far from living in wealth, they often had barely enough money to purchase food and travel to the next town. Ivy Methvin, father of Borough Gang member Henry Methvin, hated Bonnie and Clyde and worked with law enforcement to create the ambush that killed them. They even gave Bonnie and Clyde a chance to give themselves up before shooting, but when the couple reached for their guns, the officers had no choice but to open fire on the vehicle. This side of the story seems quite foreign, since no piece of Bonnie and Clyde media since 1967 has been as powerful in shaping the image of the couple. However, in 2019, Netflix released an adaptation of the story called The Highwayman, which won praise for correcting many inaccuracies from the 1967 film. While it never got the mass coverage or the awards of the 1967 film, it shows a step in the right direction in trying to prioritize truth over fantasy. After all, this is what's at stake here. If we allow the 1967 film to remain the dominant text, we continue to romanticize crime and encourage it as a reasonable solution to anyone who's fallen on difficult financial trouble or anyone who simply craves a life of dangerous adventure. We create levity in the many deaths caused by the serial killers Bonnie and Clyde and the suffering in the families of these innocents. This is the home of Doyle Johnson, a 27-year-old grocery clerk from Temple, Texas, who was married and had an infant son. He was visited by Bonnie and Clyde on Christmas Day 1932 when they were trying to steal his car as another getaway vehicle. When Doyle went outside to stop them, threatening to call the police, Clyde shot him in the neck and killed him. How would Mrs. Johnson, now a widow, react to finding out that over 15,000 people attended Clyde Barrow's funeral, while only a handful attended her husband's?